Gospel today is a difficult gospel. We're supposed to love our enemies. That's not easy, is it? And yet it's instruction from Jesus on how we are to behave toward everyone. Not just those in our church, not just those whom we like, not just those who are like us, not just those who speak like us or look like us, but to everyone. They're guidelines around being loving, forgiving, and generous. Now, that's fairly easy with our families, or at least it should be. Sometimes that generosity and love and forgiveness can be complicated by family histories and expectation and baggage. Or that we expect from our families that, I'm sure some of you have had people in your life like this, people who, if they did something nice for you, expected something in return. I've done that for you. Why aren't you behaving correctly? I bet every child in you have heard that at one point or another, or said it. You wash my hand, and I'll wash yours. They're all maxims that we live by, aren't they? And yet that's totally opposite of what Jesus is saying. This is right after the Sermon on the Mount, where he's already shocked people. But this relates to our church community as well, and I wanted to spend some time on that. Because our church community is undergoing changes. Some of us are getting older and can't do what we used to do. We're adapting to changing life and mission within our church. We're talking about going beyond our boundaries in a way that's very different than having people come into the economy shop. In church, we often seek value and support, and that's what we gain from being in church, by helping others. And our needs and our ability to contribute change over the years. And that is hard for us to accommodate. That's hard for us to get used to. I think when I worked in the nursing home and the retirement center, it was one of the most difficult things for people, especially men, and I may be making too wide of a generalization, to kind of understand. Because the men that I was working with in the retirement center were of a certain age. And of course the men had to be the providers. Well, what happens when you can't provide? What happens when you can't cook as a woman the way you used to? What happens when it's hard for you to contribute to your church the way you used to? God is a God of gaps. You know what I mean by that? Anybody ever hear that before? As some folks get older, there will be gaps in what we can provide here. And others will take on the onus of that responsibility. But it's hard for those who are losing in their productivity, in their health, in their ability to hear, in their ability to see well. So they can't go out at night, or they can't do this, or they can't do that. They begin to wonder, and we have to hold that here. They begin to wonder, am I still valued here at this church? And so they hold on really tight to the way that things have always been done. And yet that won't happen. I remember a story of a church, I think it was out in the Midwest, where they had a pie sale. And they had a new person in church. There's a man. And he brought a cake. And someone actually yelled at him for bringing a cake to a pie sale. We have to allow that things are going to change. And that if we pray about it, that it will be good. That there may be I'm going to use we were talking about corn chowder. There may be a new recipe for corn chowder that comes down the pike. And it might be better. No, he says. You know? And that doesn't mean that all you've done hasn't been worthwhile and valuable. It just means we're opening up our arms and our hearts to new ways of doing things, new missions, new ways of engaging new members. We have to consider that those people who are aging in this, including most of us, in this church, are wondering, are we going to fit in? If we can't do what we've always done, do we fit here? Are we going to be needed? Are we going to be valued? And so, as we age, we need to readjust our expectations of what we can do and what will allow the church to grow, making way for new ideas, new vision, and new ways of doing things. Doesn't mean what we did wasn't right. Doesn't mean that what we did wasn't wonderful. But it means that the church will go on. As Phil said when he did his stewardship from last year, what it's going to be like in here in 275 years from now. It will be very different. So we talk about family and how it's easy to love our family, or sometimes difficult. And we talk about friends and church community and how we have that support and friendship and meaning that we find here. What happens when you can't sing anymore, or you crack all the time, or you can't read like you used to? All those things are important to us and important ministries. But Jesus was talking today in this gospel about loving our enemies. Now, with strangers, I think that's a little bit easier, isn't it? Because strangers we don't have an investment in. We don't have a lot of history with. But are they coming to this church and finding a generosity of spirit? Because we are, every one of us, no matter our age, no matter our abilities, are God's hands, feet, and voice in this world. Now, with strangers, there's less investment on our part. At least this is what I think. Because we don't know them. We don't have any history with them. But, do we? How many of us want to grow our church? Can you raise your hand? How many people want the church to grow? How many want the church, and don't raise your hands now, because this is a challenge for you. How many of you want to have your church grow, to nurture the word of Jesus and the presence of Jesus and the Holy Spirit in this world? Or how many of you want the church to grow because we need more money for our church building or our committees? I bet the majority of us think of the committees and the church first. But our goal, and that's what Jesus is talking about, is to love one another. Because when we love one another, we share Jesus in this world. We share the love of God. We share the welcome of God. Now, our enemies are the hardest because we usually have history with enemies. Although sometimes we don't. We can judge somebody just by the color of their skin, or the accent they have, or the faith tradition they have. That, oh no, they're the terrorists. Oh no, they're going to beat me up. Or, oh no, they don't fit. So we can have expectations of somebody we don't even know. And they can be enemies right off the bat. Our purpose, and I'm going to say it again, and that's what Jesus is saying, our purpose is to model God's love and grace. And that requires forgiveness, even of our enemies. Now, I'm going to actually read you a paragraph from a sermon that I wrote in 2009. So it's an old sermon. It's 10 years old. Jesus was a radical social reformer. This is who you follow, an aside. He was Jewish to his core. He spoke to both the Jewish and the Gentile communities. He was challenging his disciples to go beyond merely extending the golden rule to one's neighbors and friends, i.e., other Jews, which comes naturally for most, to one's enemies, which in Jesus' time would have been the Gentiles. Anyone who was non-Jewish was a sinner. After all, it's easy to be good to those who love you and are kind to you, who do not speak ill of you behind your back, who are trustworthy, and who treat you with dignity and respect. But Jesus says, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. That doesn't make any sense, does it? Why would Jesus ask us to do this? Because you are God's disciples. You are God's representatives on this earth. What you think, what you say, and what you do matters. Jesus is not just advocating good behavior, but resistance to any behavior that would compromise your integrity, your kindness, and your generosity. Read this gospel over again. How would your behavior stack up? We all grew up with the golden rule, right? Do unto others as they would have do unto you. It's right here in the Bible. Imagine that. That golden rule is found in one form or another in all 12 major religions. Think about it. Now, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to apply that golden rule. If you were not from this church, how would you want to be treated when you came through the door, when you were at coffee hour, when you had a bulletin that was strange to you, where you didn't know whether you were speaking Spanish or English in the hymnal and thought you had the wrong page? What might matter to you if you were new to this church? We know that our younger folks are not going to care about our church building. That's not what's going to bring them here. What they care about is relevance to the world. What are we doing out there? What kind of missions are we doing? Did we have a float in the parade where children could pray to Jesus? It's the times they are a-changing. You know that phrase, right? And if I were a new person, or you were a young person coming to this church, wouldn't you expect some openness to your ideas? Your recipes even? Your music? And your needs? That extravagant welcome is what we need to provide. How might you be welcomed here? As a means to an end, such as getting money in the plate? Or would you be offered information, shaking of the hand, kind words and welcome, brochures? And would someone in this church have a genuine interest in your life and not to stand around with the people they knew. Today's sermon is very much targeted at this church based on the gospel. Because you are changing, you are growing, you will have new missions going on over the next years. How do you accommodate that? How do you accommodate new folks who may look a little bit different? Who may have mental health issues, or may be addicted to drugs and alcohol, or may be of a different culture. How do you bring them in? How do they know what the committees are? How do they know that they can sign up on the bulletin board to read? What if they had an accent when they read? Oh my gosh. We now have it in the bulletin, so you know. We're changing. Read this gospel over. And if you can read the story of Joseph, it begins in Genesis chapter 37 and ends with 45. If you don't think that the Bible shows us dysfunctional families, that's one heck of a dysfunctional family. I love that saga, and I would have loved to spend time on it today, but I think what we need to do is think about how we're growing, how we're changing, how we're accommodating those who are getting older and those who are coming in who may have different needs. And how we can be God's hands and feet, tongues, ears, and sight in this world. How can we change? How can we be God? How can we bring God's generous spirit into this world? Because that's what will bring people in, not anything else. Knowing that they're loved, knowing that they're forgiven, knowing that they're not being judged, but they are welcomed extravagantly and with love and grace. Amen.